Okay, we move now to 3D modeling. We'll start with Blender. Blender is mainly for doing animation, simulations, video games, but you can even do projects that you can actually fabricate. The important thing about Blender is that it works with mesh modeling. Within a mesh, the geometry is described in this way. So you have a set of vertices, they are connected in edges, and the edges are connected in faces. Then in other software you have even polygons of faces and surfaces, but in Blender you just work with vertices, edge, and faces. And that's mainly the way you describe the geometry. You have also some NURBS modeling in Blender, but it's very basic, so we won't cover it. That's important to understand about this mesh modeling, that you basically always have an approximation of the surface, of the curve and the object. And that's important because sometimes, especially for video games and animation, you need to have smaller models and then they took less memory. But if you want to do something that's really precise, that's not soft. In any case, if you want to use this for 3D printing, that's perfect, because in any case, most of the software use STL files for 3D printing and they are mesh. So even if you work from Rhino, you have to convert to mesh from there. So a very good website for learning about Blender is blendernation.com. It's a very good blog where you have a lot of information and tutorial about using Blender. So that's a good resource that you should remember. Start Blender. So the most important thing about Blender is the interface at the beginning, because it's very flexible. It means also you can configure in any possible way. So with flexibility comes a lot of power. Here you have the menu with some options and so on. And here you have, each of these are different windows that if you click on the right top corner, and you can multiply. Okay, so in this way you add a new one. If you click on this and then you move inside, you can join them. So for example, here I can join this, and now it's one. The important thing about the window is that you can set up any window for whichever option you want. So in this case, this is for movie editing, but I can put, for example, 3D view. I rotate it with the middle mouse button, but I can put it like text editor. You can put file browser. Okay, but let's just focus on 3D view. Okay, so for example, now we'll change. For example, now we'll change this as well. So here I do view. I set up on top. You can choose between perspective and orthographic. In this case, it's perspective. So we do view orthographic. Here we do view front. And we do view orthographic. So we are sure about this. We can use this as perspective. The other thing you can do, you can see this is a camera. So that's what's used for the rendering. So you can use view and put camera. But you cannot, if you move it, it's not the camera. If you want to move it, you need to do the camera itself. But that's for the rendering, we won't cover it because you mostly will use this for modeling things. So we just use perspective and that's okay. Second thing, if you want to select things, it's not with the left click, it's with the right click. So if I do right click, I select the objects. I select the light, I select the camera, and so on. Do you see this cursor here? This is the 3D cursor. It's used for many different things, when you move something, when you add an object, and you can move it, and you move it with the left click. Okay, so remember that you want to select this with the right click. Otherwise, you need to change this in the settings. Now, the important thing about this, here we have mostly important command. Here we have the hierarchy of the scene. So you can select objects and elements with this as well. Here you have different elements that we will see later, but they're very useful for handling. So the best thing here is to have at least the 3D view. You can go to a full view with shift space. And if you click on back to previews, or you do shift space as well, again, you go back to that. Another important thing about Blender that might be a bit slow to find the commands in the interface, but if you remember the shortcuts combination, that's very fast. And usually that's the best thing about it. So I will just show you this here. In view, you set up the things about the view. Okay, in select, you select objects and so on. The important thing about selecting that if you want to select everything or the selecting is A. So A, the selected, A, select everything. If you want to select with a window, it's B, and then you can select everything inside the window. You do a selection. So for example, I do like this, I only get the camera. And A to the selected. In add, you add a lot of different entities that you can edit later. So most of them will be mesh. So for example, you have plane, cube, circle, sphere, cylinder, cone, torus, monkey. In surface you have NURBS, but they are very basic, so we won't cover them. You can do 2D curves and then modify them. Text, and even more lamp and camera. You can also do this with Shift A. And the interesting thing that they will be added where is the 3D cursor. Okay, so if I do Shift A, add cube, that's where it's added. Where is the 3D cursor? Now, how to position the 3D cursor? You can position like this, or there are different ways. The easiest way, if I press N, I will get this tab more. With this, you have information about the selected objects. So for example, you have the location. Okay, this is of the center. This is the center. You can have the scale. You can have the dimension, so you can change them. So for example, I can do something like this, and I change the scale. If I go below, I have 3D cursor. I have the position of the 3D cursor. So if I put 0, 0, 0, and 0, it goes back to the origin. So that's for being very precise where you want to put things. One more thing, if you go here and you select this, which is the scene, the first thing you can want to do is set in metric units. So now you know that this is 1 meter, 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 or centimeter, and so on, if you want to be precise about it. Okay, so that's the basic for adding things. And then objects, you have much more things that you can do with the object. But the interesting thing about this, okay, you select it. Each element has different modes for editing, and you select them here or with a tab. For example, meshes. If you have object mode, you edit the object as a whole. If you go into edit mode, you edit the elements of the object. Okay. Here you select the different coloring of the interface. One interesting thing that if you have NVIDIA drivers, graphic drivers, and you install CUDA, you can have the cycle rendered. And here you have this rendered. This is a real-time rendering machine, so you can see everything in real time. We will see a bit later. So, solid. So if I right-click on this, you see you have these different lines with different colors. If you click on one, then you can move the object along this axis. Okay. Here is where you choose them. So this is for moving, this is for rotating, and this is for scaling. Okay, along the axis. This is for manually doing this. Okay, this is just very rough. You can also use another way, or you access from here. So for example, you have object, you have transform, you have this command which are grab, move, rotate, and scale, GRS. Okay, so that's a very quick way for editing that. So if I do G as in grab, then I can move it. If I do R as in rotate, I can rotate it. And S as scale, I can do it. That's basic. The second thing is that we can choose the axis and give the dimension by tapping with the keyboard. So move, I want to move it. So sorry, G, I want to grab it and move it. If I press X, it will move only along the X axis. If I press Y along the Y, Z doesn't. Okay, so X. And then I can put the distance. So if I put 5, I can see where it is. Okay, if I do -5, it's on the other. Okay, I can delete it. So when I'm happy with this, I press enter and it's there. And the same thing if you want to rotate. So let's say I want to rotate on the Z by 45 degrees, enter. So in this way, you just have to remember the sequence of command that you're very precise about what you're doing. Otherwise, yes, it's just random. Okay, now I will show you how to edit the elements of the mesh. So I go here into edit mode. Now, if I select everything, I select the whole object, okay? But now I can select the elements. Here, I choose which element I can select. This is for selecting vertices, this is for selecting edges, and this is for selecting faces. So, for example, now I'm selecting vertices. Right click, I select these. I can move the specific vertex. I can even do, you know, Z, or grab Z1, and it's precise. Okay, or I grab Z-1, and it's the best there. So in this way, you're very precise about the transformation that you want to do. You can select more vertex, so in this case, grab Z1, and of course, this is what you get. You can select more, and you basically select an edge, or you choose this, and then you select the edge with this one. Okay, so in this case, I select only the edge. Okay, or you can select the face. Usually, you select the face with this rectangle in the middle. Then again, you move it. Okay, this is very basic. I will add something better. If you want to delete something, it's X, and then you have to set OK to delete, and then X delete. So now we'll add here the monkey, which is the basic object in Blender. Is the mascot monkey. Okay, here you have the monkey. Okay, so you see this is an approximation of the object, so it's pretty rough. If I go into inside with the tab within edit mode, you can edit the faces, so I can edit the face. Okay. Or I can do with the vertex, so I do this. Okay. When you want to select it, you may want to check everything that's also on the other side or only what you see. That's the thing you want to click. If you click this, you don't see the other side, so you select only the part that you see. Sometimes you need one, sometimes you need both. Okay. So we just go on this side. That's basic. Okay, one more thing. If you press T, you will have another thing here. Here again, you have translate, rotate, and scale. One thing that's interesting for us, here you have shading. You can select if you want a smooth or flat shading. If you have a flat, you see this as the single faces. If you press smooth, it will be a bit more rounded. Okay. If I do go into edit mode, I can still edit this. Okay, and then I see it. Now, for example, you can also vertices. It's something that you just move, but edges can be scaled. So if I select the edge, I can move it, or I can scale it. See, or I can even rotate it. And faces as well. You can rotate it, scale it, or move it with grab. But vertex, no. Vertex, you know, it doesn't have any other dimension, so it's just grab. Now, one thing more that you want to do, and you can do with the vertex, with the edge of the face, is extruding. So you can extrude the object for this. So if you extrude from the vertex, you extrude with E, and then you decide the direction. So again, for example, Z and 1 is just this. If I extrude this, extrude Z1, it's a face. If I select a face and I do extrude Z1, it has a volume. Okay. Now, for example, I want to create a face here. if you select this vertex, and this vertex, and you press F, it will create a face. It's F as in face, so it will create a face between them. Okay, I can select more, so I can select these, and these, F, and have a face over there. Okay, if you don't want it, you can select with this, you select the face, X, and what do you want to delete? Just all the vertex, the edges, the faces, edges and faces, or only faces, and just delete the face. I still get to keep the edge here. So that's one way, basic way for modeling something. So for example, grab X here, I go add a cube, I edit the cube. So for example, I select these, I can extrude Z, that's 0.5, and you see you have more faces that you can edit. So I can edit this face, I can move it, and everything changed, or I can extrude it, and that's something else. And then it's like clay, so you really move it like it were clay. Okay. And then, for example, you rotate X 45. Okay. Then, of course, in this case, the best thing is that you delete the face and you delete it, so you want to be sure. Now, for example, I will delete this as well. I will add another monkey. If I want to have a nicer surface for smooth, here you can set the rendering. So this is for the rendering. Here you have the setting for the rendering. This is the image editor, so you can go back to 3D view. The layers, you can set up in which layer it happens. The layers is also here, so you can select the layers that you show with this. So again, you have the layers, or you can do pressing move M as you move to layer, and you select the layer, and then it goes to that layer. Okay, or you can check. This is for the world. This is for the background, the image, the model. This is constraints. This is modifier. This is much more interesting for us. This is basically a way for doing some modification on the mesh. So for example, you click on this and you add one, and they stack on top of each other. So you can add more than once. And until you click apply, they are dynamic. That means that you can change the values. If you click apply, they generate the geometry, and then you cannot go back. So for example, if I click on array, then I get to have more. Okay. So for example, if I click on this, I get much more of this. Okay. If I select this and I go in edit mode, I only edit the first one because the other one are generated automatically. Okay. So if I select this, select the vertex here, and I move, they are still dynamically linked. So you just have to do it once. The same if you want to scale it. Okay. If I click, for example, apply, now if I edit, they are all generated as mesh. So I cannot modify it any longer, but I can edit and differentiate. Control Z and go back. Okay. Modify. If I click on the X, it will delete. Now, let's say I want this to be really smooth. What we want to use is subdivision surface. Subdivision surface will basically approximate the mesh into something a bit more organic. You can change the settings for the view and for the rendering. So, for example, you can do much better. If I edit it, I still edit the rough mesh. But then you see in real time what happened with the nice mesh. This means that the mesh will be bigger, so it will occupy more size on the disk and will be heavier. So if I do apply, then this really becomes the mesh. So if you want to 3D print, then you have to think about this. So that's the basic way. And then you have much more things. So you have mirror, for example. example, I do that. Okay. You can use mirror object and so on. And you have many more things, so you can really do any things that you want. You can create a skew. Decimate is very useful because it's a good way for lowering the resolution. Okay, so for example, I first add, let's try subdivision surface. I apply it, so this is quite dense. If I do the decimate, apply will try to. It depends now on the. Let's see, okay, decimate will try to change the resolution. The other one I think is Ramesh. Ramesh will start from scratch, so you can do this and then you select the thing that you want to get. This is rebuilding from scratch, so you don't get necessarily what you need, but it's a good way. And decimate it depends on, for example. Okay, this is with subdivide. It's basically the undo of the surface. Okay, so you can change the way it works. Okay. So they are very useful for saving space on the repository, for saving space when you send the files, but also for 3D printers, because if it's very heavy, then it may take more time. So it depends on the quality.
How do you work inside? Can you make hollow and put Arduino, sensor, whatever, and a precise size of the pieces?
Okay, well now here you know that the size is this with n. You see the dimensions. So this is not as precise as a CAD because the idea was you do this, you use this for animation, video games, and so on. But you can even use this for creating objects. You just know that this is this dimension. Okay. Now, for example, let's see here. There should be something for making inside. So if you do solidify, and thickness, for example, 10 centimeters. That's too big. 1 centimeter. Sorry, 1 meter. So 1 centimeter. For example, if I see here, now you see that inside there is. It's not completely solid. It's empty inside, but it has a wall. So if I do something like this, like 5, you see. Okay. Something more that you, for example, let's apply that you can do. For example, I can add a cube and I move it. So I select this. Something that you want to do is a boolean. This is like an Inkscape. You can add union, subtraction, difference. It's a bit more complicated here because of the geometry, but you can do it. So for example, I do difference and I choose the object. So the other object is the cube. So this is what you get.
You have cut the whole.
Yeah, and this is still dynamic. So if I move this,
it's not permanent.
No. Okay, you can change it. If you want to be permanent, you click on apply, and now it's permanent. For example, let me delete this. This is what we get. Okay, so you see, it does a shell. So now you can put your Arduino inside. Okay. These are the basic thing. One thing more, for example, I will show you quickly how to do the rendering. I add a plane. I move this up. Okay. One thing that I can do now, if I put render it, I see the render in real time. If I click on this, I can change the color, the material. So for example, that's diffuse. And now I see in real time how it works. Something more I can do, I can select the light, change the type to a sun, for example. And then you see how it works. I can rotate it. So if I go here, rotate that here. The more you stay still, the more it goes on in rendering. Okay? So that's something very nice to understand the differences. So if you click on this, I can, for example, check and put a glass. You can also animate things, but that's something that we do very quickly and simply here. So I will go back to normal. So now what do you want to do with this? As a very interesting thing is doing file, export the selected as STL, and then STL can be embedded, can be 3D printed, and so on. You can also do import STL. You can do import SVG. We will see it later. So you can import the 2D drawing and then transform it into 3D here. Okay. So that's the basic of Blender. You can do even more. You can do texture, animation, video editing, but that's not what we need at the moment.